it be known, Adam Schiff was censored by the House of Representatives yesterday, and it's all about Donald Trump. We'll tell you more about that. Um, and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy spent the day trying to stop Representative Lauren Boebert's motion to impeach President Biden. We'll tell you what the Republicans decided to do instead. And Yusef Salaam is running for office in New York. One of the exonerated five has decided to be on that side um, as a move to uh, further their rightful place as citizens of New York City after that awful incident in Central Park some years ago. Also, the Transformative Justice Coalition announced today that they will embark. Well, they announced earlier this week, I should say, that they've embarked on a 15-city tour to combat social injustice and racial inequality and increase voter registration in underserved communities in the state of Florida. The Transformative Justice Coalition will partner with the Florida chapter of the NAACP, the Rainbow Bush Coalition, the League of Women Voters, and Black Voters Matter to help heighten awareness. The tour has began, as I said, on June 19th. It began in Jacksonville, Florida. We're told to a fabulous turnout, and the returns were already showing. So we'll talk about that in a little while. We'll be joined by Cliff Albright, the executive director of Black Voters Matter, and Darryl Jones, an attorney and board chair of the Transformative Justice Coalition. But first, the House voted on Wednesday to censure California Rep. Adam Schiff for comments he made several years ago about investigations into Donald Trump's ties to Russia, rebuking the Democrat and frequent critic of the former president along party lines. Schiff becomes the 25th House lawmaker to be censured. He was defiant ahead of the vote, saying he will wear the formal disapproval as a badge of honor and charging his GOP colleagues of doing the former president's bidding. He said, I will not yield. He is also running for Senate in his home state. And he also said he won't budge 1 inch and give in to the Republicans in their support of the former president. When it was time for Adam Schiff to come to the front of the chamber to be formally censured, immediately after the vote, the normally solemn ceremony turned into more of a celebratory atmosphere. Dozens of Democrats crowded to the front, clapping and cheering for Adam Schiff and patting him on the back. They chanted no and shame and Adam, Adam when House Speaker Kevin McCarthy started to read the resolution out loud, as is tradition after a censure. Democrats, I should say, heckled him to the point that he stopped and gave up, leaving the chamber altogether. So Adam Schiff censored for his remarks about the former president back in 2017. Boy, oh boy, you talk about holding a grudge. That was 2017. Unreal. The one thing that they did take off the table was a massive fine for Schiff, and that made it easier for them to pass the resolution to censor him yesterday. And staying with the House, uh, Speaker Kevin McCarthy was on a mission yesterday as well. He wanted to stop temporarily Lauren Boebert's resolution to impeach President Joe Biden, arguing that now is not the right time to do this. House Republicans are divided over Lauren Boebert's resolution, with a number of members emerging from the meeting expressing frustration with the conservative Congresswoman's push to force a vote on the politically contentious issue. The GOP leaders plan to move to refer Lauren Boebert's resolution to the House Judiciary Committee and Homeland Security Committee. There will be a rule vote on the floor to make the referral to committee, allowing Republicans to diffuse the politically thorny issue for now. Though internal party tension over the issue was on full display yesterday. At the meeting, at a closed door meeting yesterday, McCarthy argued that Republicans should let committee investigations play out, and he warned them that jumping ahead to impeach now could threaten their slim majority in the House. So they're looking for cover here. Yeah, a failure, and there's no way that they would be able to get this through the Senate. And so McCarthy does not want that as a stumbling block to their uh, hopes of retaining the majority next year. The speaker noted that the House Republicans have taken back the House 5 times in the last 100 years, and 2 of those times lost the majority the next cycle. He says, "What majority do we want to be? Give it right back in 2 years or hold it for a decade and make real change?" He said he asked Lauren Boebert to speak during the closed door conference meeting, but she declined. Boy, it tells you the state of the country. It tells you the state of politics, I should say, when you have a Lauren Boebert and that class of clowns doing what they do. Oh boy. Moving on. In other news and staying in the political realm, Yusuf Salam, you remember him, who endured wrongful imprisonment, has launched a campaign for a seat on the New York City Council. He's widely recognized for the unjust ordeal that altered the trajectory of his life. Salam now aspires to join the very power structure that once condemned him. In 1989, when Salam was just 15 years old, and 4 other African American teenagers, collectively known then as the Central Park Five, were apprehended by police, falsely accused and convicted of raping and assaulting a white woman in the park on April 19th of that year. The group faced years of wrongful incarceration, years of folks like the former president condemning them, but reflecting on his experiences. Salam remarked during an interview yesterday at his campaign headquarters that he says, "I've often said that those who have been close to the pain should have a seat at the table." He and his co-defendants' miscarriages of justice included Antron McCray, Kevin Richardson, Raymond Santana, and Corey Wise. It attracted global attention. Their convictions were overturned in 2002 when new evidence, including DNA, linked the crime to a serial rapist. The city awarded the group, now known, of course, as the Exonerated Five, a settlement in the amount of $41 million. Salam is among the 3 candidates who are locked in a closely contested primary that is scheduled in just a few days on June the 27th. The primary outcome will determine who's going to represent Harlem's district in the city council. He says, "When people look at me and learn my story, they resonate with it. But now, after 34 years, I can utilize the platform I have to repurpose the pain and help uplift people as we emerge from despair." Ironically, Salam formally announced his campaign on the day Donald Trump was being arraigned in New York on criminal charges of fraud, business fraud, financial fraud, et cetera, et cetera. So you talk about a turn, right? An ironic twist to that plot there. So we'll see what happens on Monday when the primary, there will be no challenge in the general. So the primary winner will be seated in the next council term. And so it's a close race right now. We'll see what happens with Yusef Salam. Power 96 says, "I remember that miscarriage of justice so well. I am around the same age of the exonerated five." I think many remember that, what happened in Central Park and how those uh, young teenage black kids were treated and not at all given any type of fairness there. Just immediately, Johnny Cochran sort of coined the term "rush to judgment," but this was truly that, as referenced by the $41 million settlement, years later in 2002, after they were exonerated. Well, the Transformative Justice Coalition is partnering with the Florida chapter of the NAACP, the Rainbow Push Coalition, the League of Women Voters, and Black Voters Matter to help heighten awareness on a 15-city Stay Woke Tour. Join us now. Cliff Albright, the executive director of Black Voters Matter, and Darryl Jones, an attorney and board chair of the Transformative Justice Coalition. Good morning, guys.
Good morning.
Good morning, Stace. Always great to be with you.
Always good to see you. We were talking beforehand, like, didn't I see you before earlier? Well, as Greer said, yeah, you was on the show before, but not only that, we saw each other in Washington. The NMPA and the Transformative Justice Coalition have offices in the same building at the Thurgood Marshall Center. So it's always good to see Darryl Jones. It's funny seeing Darryl Jones without being accompanied by Barbara Online, though.
She's not far away. She's just on a different floor right now.
Absolutely. Well, guys, can you? Well, I'll start with you, Darryl, since we are chatting. But can you provide an overview of the goals and objectives of the 15-city tour that is organized by you guys and your partners?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having us on. You know, what we're after here, and this is the Stay Woke Florida rolling protest. And there have been policies that have been put in place in Florida dealing with the banning of books, dealing with the critical race theory, not teaching critical race theory, dealing with the AP courses for African American history, and just sort of pulling out African American history from the schools and the teaching of African American history in the schools here. So a large part of what we're doing now is that we're going around the state of Florida on this 15-city tour, this 15-city protest, to get the folks of Florida awake, to waken them up. You know, Ron DeSantis, the governor here, has says that Florida is where woke comes to die. Well, we've taken that and we said, no, we're going to encourage Florida to stay woke. And so we have some 27 Freedom Riders that we've assembled from across the country. 7 of them are from the state of Florida that have been on this tour. And let me tell you, these young Gen Zs and young millennials are bringing it to young Gen Zs and young millennials here in the state of Florida, letting them know that we're with you. What happens in Florida, it's only moments before they happen in Alabama, before it happens in Louisiana, before it happens in North Carolina, before it happens in Pennsylvania. So what they're doing and what we're doing is we want to go and touch every community that we can in the state of Florida to let them know that they have national support that's behind them and encourage them to get out and vote, register to vote, and get active in the community. And we're so we're so grateful to have great partners like Black Voters Matter. When we were at the school board meeting last night, who was right behind us? Black Voters Matter. Let me take that back. They weren't behind us. They're shoulder to shoulder everywhere we go. That's what's happening. So Stacey, I know that Cliff is going to, the good thing about Cliff, he's like my brother. He can complete my sentences and he's going to run with it.
Well, Cliff, it seems like he completed that particular sentence, but how you guys have been on the ground everywhere, but how do you plan to increase voter registration in underserved communities during this tour?
Yeah, thank you, Stacey. I mean, one of the main ways, as Darryl was saying, is just by going places, right, and talking to people. We're crazy enough to believe that if we actually go to places that have been ignored, places like the 15 cities that we're going to as part of this tour, places like, or even places that you don't think is being ignored, places like Miami or Fort Lauderdale or West Palm. But when you look at our communities, pockets of our communities that even in these major cities that everybody knows about, still our communities are ignored. They're not talked to. They don't get a door knock. They don't get a text message. And they sure as heck don't get 3 or 4 big old buses rolling through their community, letting them know that they matter, that they are loved, and that they have power. And that's a big part of what we're trying to do with this rolling protest. Yes, we're protesting DeSantis, and Darryl's absolutely correct when he talks about, DeSantis and talk about Florida's where woke comes to die. Part of our message on this tour is we don't die, we multiply. And so we are going to do exactly that on this tour. That's right. We baby's kids. We don't die. We multiply. And so as we travel around, that's exactly what we're going to do. So we're going to be building lists, building contacts, working with the local partner groups, like you mentioned, the state chapter of the NAACP, but also other local partners in each of these cities that are helping us to put this rolling protest together. Part of our objective is that we help to build their capacity, because after our buses leave and go back to DC or back to Atlanta, or our bus actually happens to be based right here in Florida. But when these buses leave, that these groups, these organizations, whether they're local NAACP chapters or groups like Roots Collective that we met with yesterday in Miami, or any of these other neighborhood groups, that they are stronger when we leave, that they have more contacts when we leave, that there are more people that are looking to volunteer and get active with them, that are looking to go to school board meetings like we did last night with Transformative Justice Coalition. And so that's part of the objectives, to protest DeSantis and send him a message, but even more importantly, to send a message to our communities and to these community groups that you are not alone. There's a lot of people talking about giving up on Florida and leaving Florida, right, and ceding over this territory, and that's part of how the South has gotten in the position it's in right now, because too many good people of goodwill turn their back on the South. This is not the time to turn our backs. This is the time to lean in and to send a message to those who mean us harm, but most importantly, come together with all those that are that believe in freedom, and let them know that you are not alone and that we have power and that we're going to use that power because we won't back down.
Yeah, let me ask you, but one of you, Darryl, Cliff, David Youngblood's been talking about this for a long time. David is a very loyal viewer of ours. In fact, David's been on the show before. But he's been mentioning this situation. He says, excuse me, at every stop, and perhaps you guys are familiar with this. At every stop, he says you should remind Florida of Sheriff Willis V. McCall of Lake County, Florida. Remind them of the Groveland case in 1948. Remind them of Harry T. Moore. Remind them of why Harry was bombed in his house with his mother and wife and daughters. Is that something that's been on, on someone's plate lately or agenda lately?
Well, I can tell you that at each of the stops that we make, one of the wonderful things that we do is that each of the stops, as Cliff was saying, it's local led. So there are issues that are germane to the local stops that we make that are lifted up. We're going to be going to many of the areas. We're going to be going to the gravesite of Miriam Clark Bethune and Lena Reef. There, we're going to be lifting up also many of the issues, the Groveland issues. We're going to be lifting a lot of that up as we go from stop to stop. What we have learned is that a large part of what we do is, as Cliff said, is to encourage that community, to empower that community. Let me tell you, when we went into Ocala, there was a monsoon, right? I mean, it was an incredible rain that was coming, just buckets and buckets of rain, and that was leading up to an hour and a half before the rolling protest arrived and the protest began. When we got inside the church, it was packed. It was packed. Why? Because folks were determined to be certain that they were being registered, and people knew that they were tired of the policies that were in place. The same with Fort Myers, little small county, right? Why? Because they're lifting up those issues. They're remembering the history. They're remembering all that went on. And that's a wonderful footage that you're showing there. When we were in, I believe that was Sarasota. All over the place that we've been, the community response has been the same. They remember the history. They know the history. They know that when DeSantis, his wife, put on the jacket, the black leather jacket with the alligator on it, saying "Where woke goes the die," they remember that that's the symbolism of the how they use young black children around ponds to lure the alligators out of the waters. They remember all of that. So yeah, I think that he's right on the point when he talks about being certainly lift up the history. But the community members know the history, and this is just encouraging them to share it with their young.
Yeah, and Cliff, talk about, if you will, some specific strategies or initiatives that is going to be and maybe has already been implemented there in Florida that you guys are doing. I know that the NAACP did the travel advisory, not a travel ban, but a travel advisory to Florida. Any initiatives or specific strategies you can share?
Yeah, I mean, most importantly, the main strategy is just, supporting the local work that organizations are doing 365 days out of the year. We call it the 365 work, right? Building power and electoral organizing can't be a matter of something that we do for two or 3 weeks. before a November election, because people are looking at our communities and looking at the state saying, oh, we need you to save democracy, right? We need you to save the country. It's not something that you can do just every 4 years or even every 2 years. It's something that's got to be worked on every day of every year. There's no such thing as an off year. And so one of the most important strategies, it's not fancy, it's not rocket science, but part of what we do is that we support those organizations, sometimes even with financial support, with many grants that we provide to these groups that are doing amazing work, but severely under-resourced, right? And so that's one of the strategies. But another strategy, and I think that you'll see this on this tour that we're doing, on this rolling protest that we're doing, because this is hard work and it's serious work, right? But you've also got to find some space for some Black love and Black joy in this work, right? Even in our most dire situations, even in our most oppressive situations, even in the slave community, we had space to create Black love and Black traditions, whether it was jumping the broom or our music or any of the other things that we did. Even in an oppressive space, you always got some room that you got to cling to and find some love and some joy and utilize our culture. And that's part of what we'll be doing on this tour. When we're rolling through these streets, you're going to hear music playing from the buses. You might hear somebody on a mic giving a little spoken word or two, or giving spitting a couple of rhymes or something like that on this 50th anniversary of hip hop. But we've got to find ways to incorporate that into our work, because even think, how it was during the civil rights movement, even during the worst of times, at every one of those church meetings, what did you have? You had folks singing, right? You had folks singing and dancing and praising and all that. We've got to include that in our work today, and too often we don't do that. And so that's a strategy that we incorporate, not just in this rolling bus tour, this rolling protest, but even in the day-to-day work that we do with our partners, incorporating our music and love and culture and joy. That's part of what makes the work sustainable. And guess what? That's part of what makes people want to get down, right? People don't always just want to get down to hear a sad story, right? They don't, you mentioned the thing about Harry Moore, they don't just want to hear the history of the wrong that happened. They want to hear the power of what we did in response to it and how we overcame, right? They want to hear, where's the space of Black love and Black joy and Black victory? And so we try to incorporate that in everything that we do, whether it's the rolling protest or a polling place party during election time and early voting, or during a youth concert that we're getting young folks to turn out and have a good time, but also to talk about the issues that they care about. In everything we do, we got to incorporate that. That's one of the strategies that we found to be very successful.
And when it comes, and we're talking about Florida here, when it comes to voter registration and voter engagement, what are some of the biggest challenges there in Florida?
Wow. I think that one of the biggest challenges in Florida is letting them know that their vote matters. That every vote really matters. And when we have the opportunity to, one of the things that we're doing, and it sort of dovetails into what Cliff was saying. One of the things we do, we call it the rolling protest, but there's so much more that's to it, because we go through Black low-income communities. And the votercade, that's the votercade aspect of it, because we're going through those communities because these are the voters that they decided they didn't care about. They want to cast them off. They're going to be their low performers, as they call them. What we recognize and what we believe is that those folks in those communities, our people in those communities, those are the ones that can make the difference. Once we can get them activated, once we can get them to see the power of it, the votercade goes through to empower them, to encourage them. It brings them to the community, to the celebration village, to celebrate the vote. If it's during a campaign season, during an electoral season, the celebration village is done at a polling place, so they can go to a celebration village to celebrating the vote and encourage them to actively register to vote, and if possible, vote in an absentee ballot, or drop an absentee ballot in a ballot box, right? So all of that are the things that we focus on, and all that comes about with this. So, when you ask about the challenges is to be certain that folks realize the power of their ballot, the power that's in their hand, the power to make that change. And I believe that we do it in a celebratory way, because we think all of it should be celebrated. And the more we can celebrate, the more we can educate, the more empowerment, the more empowered the community becomes, and the more change they have for their community and access to programs and to services that government should be providing for.
Yeah, here's something. Power 96, another uh, dedicated viewer. We really appreciate Power 96 as well. He says, let's keep it real. A lot of Hispanics, Latinos are voting against their own interest in Florida. Um, how do you encourage people if they're doing that, to stop voting against your own interests? We hear stories all the time. We see polls that suggest that marginalized people are indeed, as he says, voting against their own interests. What message can you give to these those type of individuals to kind of open their eyes, if you will?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of organizations that we partner with that are kind of multicultural, multi-ethnic, multiracial. We were at an incredible meeting just last night at the Miami Workers Center. Shout out to them, y'all. Please support that organization, doing great work around tenants' rights and domestic workers. But we were at their meeting last night, and they had, I think this is my first time ever seeing it at a community meeting. They had those translation devices that were where they were translating their meeting in real time to people in 3 languages, in
Hmm.
English, Spanish, and Haitian Creole, right? I don't
Wow.
think I've ever seen that at a community meeting with those devices, right? Um, but we partner with organizations like that are multicultural, multiracial, multi-ethnic, where these conversations can take place around how our interests really are similar, and trying to get people to recognize the ways that a divide and conquer strategy is being used. And so there are strategies like that, which really, again, just takes deep organizing and deep relationship building and hard conversations. You had asked the question about the obstacles, and Darryl was exactly right in talking about one of the obstacles
You solemnly
in
swear
terms
the
of
testimony you're about
you
to
know
give will be the truth.
communicating with our folks, and dealing with motivating people to go vote. But I just want to mention, Florida is one of the places when people talk about what happened in the last election. Why did turnout go down? How did DeSantis win by such a big margin? They say that as if they ignore that Florida was one of the places where you had some of the worst voter suppression policies passed, and a range of them, including ones that we as Black Voters Matter and other organizations, League of Women's Voters, and others, Equal Ground, and other partners, are suing the state of Florida and successfully won. We've had cases. We had a case that was decided by a district court that decided that not only was it voter suppression and a violation, that it was so bad that certain aspects of Florida's election policies should be what they call bailed in and have to be pre-cleared, even for the next 10 years or something like that. The Supreme Court is in the process of looking at this, but we've sued the state of Florida. We like to sue DeSantis, but the point is, but we don't like the fact that there's so many bad policies, including the gerrymandering that they did, which was unheard of, where he basically overrode the legislature and created his own map to gerrymander Black communities and to take away some of our power. That's a map that's going to be impacted by this recent Milligan decision by the Supreme Court. And so there are legal obstacles, right? We were talking to folks last night that said that as part of their anti-immigration, that undocumented, not even just undocumented, even legal residents, you have to be a citizen to go out and do voter registration work. So even if you are a legal resident, you can't work for an organization where you're going out doing voter registration. That is unheard of. But that's what the state of Florida has done, which makes it very hard to organize legal voters, right? Citizen voters, but it decreases the base of workers that you have that can go out and have these conversations and register voters. That's not an accident, and that doesn't even have anything to do with just being anti-immigrant. That is a sheer power grab to keep groups from being able to have the workers that they need to be able to have these conversations and increase their voter registration. So none of this is accidental. Those are real barriers. That's not a matter of Black folks or even brown folks just saying, hey, I don't want to go vote. vote, those are structural barriers. Those are legal barriers. Those are Jim Crow 2.0 barriers right here in the state of Florida. That's part of what we're raising awareness about on this rolling protest. That's part of what we're fighting on a daily basis with the 365 work. That's part of why we're suing the state. And that's part of why we know ultimately that we're going to win.
Yeah, best case scenario, realistically, how does this get changed? Because you have you mentioned DeSantis, that he's not only the governor, but he has the House and the state House and the state Senate. Um, they go along with everything pretty much that he lays out, his fight against Disney, among other things, among so many other things, that the critical race theory, as you mentioned earlier, banning books, firing librarians and teachers. Um, best case, realistic scenario, how, how and when can this get changed?
Well, that's a great question. And let me tell you, I wanted to add on one thing to what Cliff was saying from our previous from the previous comment. And one of the things that we've also noticed while we've been out there and love having the League of Women Voters with us is that they're registering voters at every stop we are. We have, what the state has done is that they have intentionally created confusion. Let's say, confusion with regards to, am I registered? Confusion to, can I register? And we focus a lot right now on the restoration of votes for those that are returning citizens. And what the state of Florida has done is they've presented in such a confusing way that those that are returning citizens don't know whether or not they have the right to vote. The Amendment 4 that they took up here, once the state and the residents of the state said yes, those that have been previously convicted of felonies should have their right to vote restored, that the legislature then came behind and confused it by saying you have to pay your fines, fees, and restitution. And if by the way you're wrong and you don't pay at all, that's going to be a felony. We're going to send this police squad out to get you. So it's creating a lot of confusion within the ranks of who can register, who to vote. When Cliff was talking about the third party folks that are coming in to register, it's creating confusion. And that confusion has a chilling effect, which lowers the amount of participation of people that are willing to get involved in it. So you ask, what can we do? What are the next steps? We believe, we don't believe on fighting on any one front. We're going to fight on every front. We're going to use the courts, as you hear from Evan Milligan and the Milligan versus Alabama and Black Voters Matter and all the other voting rights organizations. We'll use the courts to sue to stop legislation that's been put in place. We're going to be out there on the front registering voters because we want people to get out there and vote. If we can activate those that are in the voting community, activate those to sue in the courts. Everything that's at our disposal, we're going to throw at this because we know that when we fight, we win. Reverend Jackson used to always preach that, haven't lost a fight that we didn't get in. So we got to be certain that we're in the fight. We've got to step up, number one, and be in the fight and encourage people to stay in there, vote, get voting, and register more voters.
Want to say good morning. Want to say good morning first to Curtis Kibbe, who's watching from the United Kingdom. He says he works at the military as a military nurse and a sergeant. Welcome. Go ahead, Cliff.
Yeah, I just want to. I'm so glad my brother Darryl talked about the restoration of voting rights, right? Because I'd be remiss if we're in the state of Florida and not shout out our good friends Desmond Meade and Sheena Meade and the incredible work that they did with the amendment to get that to even be possible. And I think that that's a good example to your question, as you were asking your question, like how long will it take, like how is this going to happen? As you were asking, I was reminded of Dr. King's famous speech at the end of the Selma to Montgomery march, where they get to the Montgomery Capitol and he gives the famous "How long" speech, right? How long before we have our voting rights? How long before justice reigns? And the answer every time he asked the question from the crowd was not long, right? How long?
Yeah.
Not long. And that's the same message that we're going to have here in the state of Florida. It may seem like things are dark. Scripture said weeping may prevail for a night, but joy cometh in the morning, right? It may seem like the forces of evil, right? The forces of racism, the forces of anti-Blackness, anti-women, anti-LGBT. It may seem like they have a leg up right now, but how long? not long. That's part of what this rolling protest is all about. That's part of why even remembering the victory that Brother Desmond and that we had with the amendment to even get voting rights to be reestablished. Yeah, they did some tricks to try to weaken it, but at the end of the day, they can't stop the rain. They can't stop the march, the movement towards progress, right? It may not happen as quickly as we wanted, but it is happening, because at the end of the day, what we got to remember is people cheat when they are losing. That's why they're doing all this. They're doing all this because they're desperate, because they know that we've got the numbers. They know that there's more of us than them. They know that if we ever really came together in unity, black and brown, Haitian and others, that if we really all came together, poor whites that want some health care, that want abortion rights, they know that they can't stop us. So how long? Not long. We just got to be willing to do the grind, to do the daily work, to come together in coalition. Because as Darryl said, when we work together, we win. That's what our history shows us.
Darryl, I gotta ask you. I mean, we've heard references from Cliff on Baby Kids. We've heard "Can You Stop the Rain?" How long? I mean, how often do you have to endure that? It sounds like a good. Well, I shouldn't say endure it, but how long? How often do you get to enjoy all of that?
Let me tell
you were right the first time with endure.
I mean, I'm tempted to prolong this show just to hear some more. But as we close, though, I want you guys to just give us an idea of how are you going to measure success, the success of this tour, and what type of follow-up to this tour is in the works.
We're going to measure the success of this tour. It's being seen every day, right? Every stop on this rolling protest, we're seeing the success of the tour. You got to remember that when we started this rolling protest, we were told not to come here. We were told we were wasting our time to come to Florida, that folks were going to respond, the community was not going to come out. So the success of the tour, we're seeing it immediately. When we rolled in Leesburg, and Leesburg is packed, and they're waiting, and they're seeing the biggest, blackest bus in America roll in with this big John Lewis bus, and they're partying, they're registering voters, and they're talking about, we now believe. One of the messages that we received when we got here was that we asked the question of the Florida State NAACP president, Dr. Nwize, what is it that folks need in Florida? What can we do? And the answer was, people feel down. They feel as though there's nothing they can do. They're given in to the policies that are there. Our thing right now has got to be, don't let them lure you asleep with these suppressive policies. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to say, you're too weak. There's nothing you can do now. We got you. So that's why we're going around, and we came up with the message, stay woke. Wake up and stay woke. Stay woke, stay woke, stay woke. That's what's happening now. The lasting policy will be energized communities that are activated and registering voters and getting out there to actually vote. One of the most touching things that I saw at this point on this tour, because we give away thousands of banned books as we're going to these across these different areas and all these different stops. One of the most touching things that I saw was when we were in Leesburg, and this little 6-year-old kid came up and got his book and had his John Lewis button and sat there and was looking at both, just as big as grin on his face. And his book was I Am John Lewis. And he said, what? This is the same guy that's on my shirt. This is him. That's what it's about. That's the inspiration that we're hoping to build, and that will be the lasting legacy in these communities.
And Cliff, pretty much same question. What the follow-up looks like? What does that look like?
I mean, the follow-up looks like staying in touch with these people that we come in contact with, right? Because again, it's not just about a one day or a one-stop thing. It's about that this is a process of connecting with people, getting them connected to the local groups, so that now we've got a larger army that's doing this work on a day-to-day basis. So that's a big part of the follow-up. Let me say this too. Because I really want to shout out my brother Darryl and my sister Barbara, who's not on here right now. But, there are a lot of people in the country talk about, with the AP and the history and the book bans, like, what are we going to do? We got to do something, like, where do we start? Because there's so much. And my brother Darryl and sister Barbara said, look, they pulled together this rolling protest. They got other organizations to sign on. We're rolling with them, and at least half of the cities that we're going to as part of this. But I really want to shout them out for having a vision to not wait until we had the perfect answer or until we had all the answers, but to recognize that we need a answer and that we need to start moving. Because once we start movement, that's how you build momentum, right? And so from this rolling protest, there's going to be momentum, and there's going to be a bunch of next steps, which is going to include people being better connected to these local organizations that are right here in the state. It's going to be people believing that they have power. It's going to be people believing that they are not alone, to the point that Darryl just made. People feel down. And I don't care what you say. There's never a situation where people feel down that you've increased our chances of victory. There's no basketball team, right, that when they feel down, that they're more likely to win the championship. There's no evidence of that in any kind of organizing. So oftentimes, a very first step is that we've got to get people to believe, because as we often say, as a person believeth, as a man believeth, as a woman believeth, as a community believeth, so is he, so is she, and so are we. And so we've got to believe that we've got power. We've got to believe that we have a chance to do this. And we got to get some small victories. It may not be, changing all of these policies overnight, but we got to get some small victories. Victories like what we saw in Jacksonville just a few weeks ago, right? People were talking about, oh, there hasn't been a Democratic mayor in, decades and all that. And DeSantis just won by double digits and all that. And then what happened in Jacksonville? Shocked the country. Right? That's a small victory that helps to build momentum. So you take things like that. You take things like a rolling tour. You take things like people organizing for tenants' rights in Miami. You take all of these victories. You take what happened at the school board meeting last night, where people speaking out against the book bans. You build up on these things. You build momentum, and the next thing Darryl talked about the monsoon the other night in terms of the rain at the event. But we're talking about a monsoon of righteousness, right? Like justice rolled down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. That's the kind of momentum that you can build. But it takes doing the grind, doing the 365 work, connecting people, better connecting people, and people believing in our power.
I did not read that you were a pastor or anything like that. Darryl, you didn't warn me about this. It got the producer saying, pass the plate.
No, I just hang out with people like Darryl that inspire me. That's
is that what happened? Darryl being quiet about it, right?
I try to speak before Cliff, because I know that after he speaks, that the bar is just raised so high.
Cliff Albright, Black Voters Matter, and Transformative Justice Coalitions. Darryl Jones, we appreciate both of you. The 15-city rolling protest, it lasts through June the 23rd. Those are the cities that you see on your screen, winding up in St. Augustine. So at somewhere along the point, folks, if you want to join this, there it is right there. Is there a quickly website?
Oh, absolutely. The tjcoalition.org. And if you go to our Facebook page at the Transformative Justice Coalition, we will have live streamed each of the protests as we arrive, as well as on Lit TV.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, guys. Appreciate you joining us. The Stay Woke Tour. Join them, and we will see you again tomorrow. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.